We will be comparing the Spartans and the men from Athens. Sparta. Sparta was the greatest military power in Greek city states. Spartans lived in harsh conditions without luxuries to make them tough fighters. There's much less information about Spartans than other Greek city states. Spartan education. Physical training and fitness was considered to be an important part of Spartan's child's education. Girls did not fight in wars, but they took part in physical activities because Spartans believed fit and strong women would have healthy babies that would be good soldiers. Boys went to live at an army barrack at the age of 7. Hmm. They started early. Historical accounts tell of Spartan boys as being allowed no shoes, very few clothes, and being taught to take pride in enduring pain and hardship. So, if you're a young man, consider what life would be like for you if you were in Sparta. At the age of 20, Spartan men had to pass a series of tests of physical and leadership abilities. Those that passed became members of the Spartan military and lived in barracks with other soldiers. They were allowed to take a wife, but they weren't allowed to live with her. So consider that fact that you could marry a woman, but you could not live with her. At age 30, they became full citizens of Sparta, provided they had served honorably. They were required to continue serving in the military, however, until the age of 60. So you started at the age of 30 and you were there until the age of 60. Spartan education. Somewhat ironically, women in Sparta had much more independence than women in other city states, partially because their husbands never lived at home. Hmm. And partially because Spartans had tremendous respect for Spartan mothers. Spartan government. Sparta had its own system of government, which was very different from other city states. Rule was shared by two kings and an assembly. It was considered an oligarchy. Sparta's government never went beyond this. Spartan classes. Spartans were either paradisi, citizens who paid taxes, served in the army, and were protected by Spartan laws, or helots, people from lands conquered and ruled by Sparta. The top class of true Spartans ruled and were the wealthiest. The middle class was made of merchants and businessmen. The largest class was that of the helots. Helots. Spartan citizens were given land which was farmed by the helots. The helots were treated as serfs or slaves and had to give half their crops to their Spartan master. Now let's consider how life was in Athens. Athens was known for its large contributions to Western civilization. Unlike Sparta, Athens was not a city state for war, it was one which valued philosophy, equality, and arts. Those things were more important to the Athenians. Athens education. The primary purpose of Athenian education was to produce thinkers, people well trained in arts and sciences, people prepared for peace or war. Young Athenian boys were tutored at home until the age of 6 or 7, and then they were sent to the neighborhood schools for primary education until they were 14 years of age. So clearly, this is different from life in Sparta for young men. These schools were usually private schools, but tuition costs were low enough that even most poor Athenians could afford to send their boys to school for at least a few years. Athenian education. During primary school, one moment, having some technical difficulties. Scroll back up. Appreciate your patience. We'll go back up. And now let's see. They were prepared for war. But this is something to consider how life was completely different for those young men of Athens and compared to those of Sparta. The young men in Sparta, we've already learned that they started at a very early age and they really didn't have a choice in the matter. But if you were in Athens, you had more choice. All right, let's continue to look at the Athenian education. During primary school, younger boys learned how to play ball games, while other older boys were taught more military type activities such as running, boxing, and wrestling. All Athenian boys were expected to read heavily, so clearly this was a difference than life in Sparta. In Athens, they were expected to read heavily because literature played a very important part in their education. The national epic poems, Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, were mandatory teaching in all Athenian elementary schools. Athenian education. The boys were also taught how to play the lyre, sing, and do arithmetic. The emphasis on Athenian education was to prepare well rounded citizens capable of performing whatever task was asked of them. So, clearly, again, a huge difference. Athenian girls were not officially schooled. However, they were allowed to learn in the privacy of their own homes. But as a result, most Athenian women had primary domestic educations. So, again, this was a difference from women in Sparta. Athenian wisdom. Athens created philosophers, which literally meant lovers of wisdom. Philosophers began to question the mythology. Some, like Zophanes, began to reject the old beliefs. Instead, man was the measure of all things. Truth of the world had to be explained by human reason or intellect. One of these famous thinkers was Socrates. He insisted that morality was part of philosophy. He emphasized also to ask questions and having his students examine their own beliefs. The Athenians thought he caused too much trouble by having his students question the gods. So clearly they were still polytheistic, but he got in trouble because he encouraged them to question the gods. The Athenians gave him the option between exile or death. He chose to take his own life by drinking hemlock, a poison. Here's another famous philosopher, Plato. Socrates inspired Plato, one of his students. He wrote more than 30 works of his philosophy called dialogues. He recognized that the invincible things in nature all had order and purpose. His philosophies were, however, close to Christianity. Another famous philosopher was Aristotle. He was then taught by Plato. He also recognized order and purpose in the universe. He concluded, however, that there must be a superhuman thinking being called God who gave that order. Athenian government. Athens' government frequently changed. The move towards democracy started with Solon. He was an aristocrat who introduced democratic principles in Athenian government. His laws gave all free adult males the right to participate in the assembly. The assembly voted on new legislation and other major decisions. Pericles. Pericles was an aristocrat who brought democracy to its full measure. He made it possible for the poor to still be politically active. He asked for fees to be paid for those who serviced politically. Pericles. He was an excellent orator or speaker. If you remember previously, you were to read documents that talked about Pericles. He was also one that greatly valued Athenian society. He encouraged patriotism by stressing the unique freedom that Athens had. Here's some thoughts of Pericles. He wanted freedom for all to have a say in public business, live a private life without interferences, rise by one's own merits from poverty and obscurity to renown and wealth. Athenians used their power and obeyed the laws and authorities. They refrained from injuring one another and displayed valor to defend their cities. Athenian rights. In Athens, all adult free males could assemble, speak, listen to speeches, and then make decisions for their cities. So they had more rights. If you were an adult free male, Athenian government. Today we have representative democracy. The people elect representatives to make the big decisions in government. In Athens, they had direct democracy. The people themselves made the big decisions directly. So the people had a say in the government, unlike what we do today. Athenian army. Athenian soldiers were required to serve 2 years in the military. So this was a clear difference. 2 years in comparison to however many years the Spartans were. You can go back and look and re-listen to how many years that was. After the first year, they were given a sword and a shield with the state's emblem on it. Although they served only 2 years, they could be called at any moment up to the age of 60. Must be something about the age 60. If your mind goes back to what we just learned about the men of Sparta, they served up until the age of 60. The army consisted of horsemen and hoplites, foot soldiers. They were armed with swords, shields, and extremely long lances. Compare and contrast. Now that you know more about the men of Athens and Sparta, instead of filling in a Venn diagram, actually that's what you can do. Fill in your Venn diagram that will be uploaded into GoFormative and compare the two. And then once you have compared the two, then you will write a paragraph using our writing strategy. Once again, now that you've learned more about Athens and Sparta, after reading about them in various documents, I want you to fill in your Venn diagram that you will find on GoFormative, and then you will use the information that you have gathered to create your paragraph. Your paragraph should have at least 11 sentences, again, using the writing strategy that has been shared with you in previous times.